Protected by awesome Terminator armor, librarians can focus on lending a psychic edge to Space Marine assaults. In this video, we'll be showing you how to paint this librarian in Terminator armor so he can unleash these mind-melting energies on the gaming table. If you're new to painting, you can check out the Citadel Colour Painting Essentials videos to learn more about it. Paints we've used in this guide are listed on screen now. Remember, we're painting in the colours of the Ultramarines, but you can choose to paint your miniatures however you like. Also on screen now is any additional equipment we've used. This includes paintbrushes and mediums. Feel free to use whatever brushes you're most comfortable with, and if you don't have mediums at home, you could swap these out for water instead. So to start off this guide, we've undercoated the model, and for this we've used Macragge Blue. We'll also need a pot of Macragge Blue to hand, just for one of the later stages. Now you'll notice on the box art that the librarian has darker armour than a normal Ultramarine, so we're going to base coat all of that armour using Cantor Blue. The great thing about this is that it will go over that blue undercoat really easily and quickly. We should really only need one or maybe two coats. Cantor Blue is a base paint, so it's good practice to thin it down with some water before we apply it to the miniature. This will help to avoid clogging up any fine detail. We're using a medium base brush here as we don't need to worry about being neat. We just need to make sure we get into all those hard to reach areas. Now we're going to use that Macragge Blue just to paint in the circle on the shoulder pad that we can see. For this we're using a medium layer brush as we need a little bit more control of the paint. We don't want to mess up that armour that we've just spent a while painting. However, if you do make any mistakes, just thin down some Cantor Blue and correct them. Again, thin your Macragge Blue down and apply a couple of coats. We want to avoid any texture building up on this area. With the armour painted, we can now move on to some of the other details. So we'll start off by painting the black areas using Abaddon Black. This will be the undersuit and the gun casing. Again, we'll stick with that medium layer brush as it's small enough to help us be neat, but a little bit larger so we can paint a bit quicker too. Apply this paint just like you have the other base paints. Take your time and work your way around the miniature. Again, you might need to do a couple of coats just to get a full coverage. Next, we're going to paint those yellow pipes using Avalon Sunset. Now this is quite a light paint and it will take us a few coats to fully cover the area. So just keep your paint thin and apply as many layers as you need to. We don't want any of that blue showing through. Don't worry if you're a little bit messy here and you get some on the other pipes, we'll be painting these in red in a minute. You might find it easier to switch to a small layer brush as some of these details are quite tricky. The next thing we're going to do is paint the rocks and the Crux Terminatus, and we'll use Celestra Grey for this. Blocking in all the colours on a miniature like this is called base coating. When paints have been stood for a while, it's quite normal for them to separate in the pot, so be sure to give them a good shake before you use them and apply them to the miniature. This is a great choice for both of these areas on the model, and we'll be adding the same shade over them later, which again will tie everything together. Now we can see that the miniature's got lots of power nodes on the armour, and for these we're just going to base coat them with Corax White. Make sure you thin this down and carefully apply it to the miniature. If you make any mistakes, just tidy back up the area with Cantor Blue. We'll be applying a paint over this later, which will give it a nice blue glow. But for now, we just need to base coat them in white. Now it's time to paint the skin and the parchment. We're using Rakarth Flesh for this. We've chosen to use this as we're trying to tie into that box art, but feel free to use whatever skin tones you prefer. Rakarth Flesh works really well in this instance as we can use it for the skin and the parchment too. Again, some of these details are quite intricate, so stick with that small layer brush and just take your time. Now we're going to paint the brown areas using Mournfang Brown. This is a really warm brown, so we're going to use it to paint the leather and also the miniature's hair. Just be careful around the rest of the face, as we've already painted this and it'll save us time if we don't need to do too much tidying up. And now we can see our model is really taking shape. We've just got a few metallic areas to paint next. So for the silver areas, we're going to use Lead Belcher. Again, you can refer to the box art if you're unsure on where to place colours, but do feel free to choose for yourself as well if you prefer. This is a metallic base paint, but we treat it just like all the others. Just make sure you thin it down on your palette before you apply it to the miniature. Just make sure that it doesn't get too watery, as you'll find it separates when we paint it on. Now we'll paint the gold areas using Retributor armour. You'll see that this is all the iconography on the model, and this is the classic gold of the Ultramarines. Again, just make sure you thin it down and that it doesn't get too watery. We'll need to do a few layers to make sure that we get full coverage. Once you've finished using metallics, it's always a good idea to change your paint water. This will avoid those shiny flakes getting into any of your non-metallic paints. Now we're going to use Reikland Flesh Shade to shade the skin. Again, if you've used a different skin tone, feel free to use a different shade. It's really your choice. We're using Reikland Flesh Shade here to add a little bit of warmth back to that skin tone. When you're using shades, just make sure to avoid any excess pooling. So if you find it is pooling in the recesses too much, clean off your brush and use that to soak up any excess. Now for our next shade, we're going to use Agrax Earthshade and Lamia Medium. So to start off with, we'll use 1 part Lamia Medium to 1 part Agrax Earthshade. Thinning a shade down means it's more subtle on the miniature and doesn't overpower those base coats. It also avoids it settling on those raised areas too much. We'll be using this to paint the parchment, the yellow and the red details. Just be careful not to overload your brush and make sure you keep an eye on any excess pooling. Then we'll be taking it straight from the pot and applying it over the brown and the gold details. You'll see that this adds lots of depth and really starts to tie everything together. Our next paint is going to be Basilicanum Grey, and we'll be thinning this down with Contrast Medium. We'll be applying this over the silver, the rocks, and we'll use it as a recess shade for the armour too. So firstly, we'll thin it down using 1 part Contrast Medium to 1 part Basilicanum Grey, and this will go over the silver and the grey details. Again, thinning it down just means it's a little bit more subtle. Now you might notice that Basilicanum Grey is a contrast paint, so it might seem a little odd that we're using it to shade. However, it's a really versatile paint, and when we thin it down, it has lots of different effects on a miniature. It's a great way to get the most out of one paint. Then we'll take it straight from the pot, and we'll be using this as a recess shade. A recess shade just means applying a shade directly into the recesses on a miniature. If we applied it all over the armour, we'd end up changing the colour of the armour and we'd have to spend a lot of time layering back up with that Cantor blue. Applying it this way means we get the shade where we want it and we might only have a few mistakes to tidy up. A medium or small layer brush works well here, as we need plenty of control over that paint. Just be careful not to overload your brush, as the paint can quickly run out of control on a miniature. Take your time and work your way around the miniature, picking out all of those panel lines. This will take a little while, but it's well worth the effort. You'll see that it adds loads of depth and interest to the model. Now your librarian is looking awesome and is more than ready to head straight onto the gaming table. However, if you'd like to see how to take this paint job up a notch, stick with us. So to achieve that blue glow that we can see on the box art, we're going to be using Baharoth Blue with Lamia Medium. We'll be thinning this down to create the consistency of a wash, and this means we can use the paint in a variety of different ways. Firstly, we're going to use it to drop into all of those recesses and create those glowy runes. You can see that by dabbing the brush over the recessed area, the paint drops into the recess and we get this really bright glow effect. Now you might get a little bit around the edges and it might start to look a little bit messy, so you might just need to go back in with some Cantor Blue and tidy up. Once we've worked our way around all of the runes, we'll then add some to the axe too. So you can see we're just dropping this around that gold detail, and this will create that blue glow again. Feel free to choose how much or how little of this effect you want to do. It's really a personal choice. We'll also be adding this to the power nodes, the eyes and the hand too. Again, this will give us that blue glow. We'll be using 2 parts Lamia Medium to 1 part Baharoth Blue, and we might just need to remix that a few times during this process, as there are quite a lot of rune details to pick out. And the final thing we're going to do is apply an edge highlight of Calgar Blue to that armour. Just like with the runes, it's up to you how much or how little of this you choose to do. You could just pick out the most prominent edges if you prefer. Make sure you thin your paint down so that it glides nicely off the brush. We don't want it too watery, as it won't settle on the miniature properly. Once you're happy with your paint consistency, use the edge of your brush and run that along any of those hard armour edges. Doing this is a really quick and easy way to achieve a very crisp highlight. The brush does all the work for you. However, don't worry, mistakes can always just be tidied up with the previous colours. Take your time and work your way around the miniature, picking out as many of those edges as you like. And there we are, your Ultramarines librarian is finished and ready to unleash that psychic wrath upon his enemies on the gaming table. You can see that we've applied transfers and also based our miniature. We've based it using a technical paint called Armageddon Dust, and if you'd like to learn more about technical paints, you can check out the video all about them. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, you can head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be happy to help, or head on over to citadelcolour.com. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the video and we'll see you next time. Bye!